A final ride. The woman who laughed before the push. The subway station was nearly empty. A dull, flickering light buzzed above, barely illuminating the cracked tiles below. The only sounds were the distant, muffled echoes of a departing train and the occasional scuttle of something unseen in the dark corners. At this hour, the underground was abandoned, except for the few lost souls who had nowhere else to be. Daniel clutched his phone, refreshing his feed with jittery fingers. His last train home was running late, again. A sigh escaped his lips, curling like mist in the cold air. He had worked late at the bar, as usual, scrubbing beer-stained floors and pocketing half-hearted tips. The city drained him, but the alternative was worse. Silence, isolation, a life without the numbing repetition of work and transit. A distant laugh rang through the station, soft yet unnatural. It carried an eerie quality, too deliberate to be casual, too drawn out to be cheerful. Daniel stiffened. He wasn't alone after all. He turned his head, scanning the platform. A woman stood near the tracks, her back facing him. She wore a long, dark coat, her hair cascading in tangled waves over her shoulders. Something about her posture was off. Too rigid, too still. Then, as if sensing his gaze, she shifted. Her head twisted slightly to the side, though she did not turn around. Another laugh escaped her lips, more unsettling than before. Daniel swallowed hard and checked the time again. Just 3 more minutes until his train arrived. The woman moved. Slow, deliberate steps as she glided toward the very edge of the platform. She rocked slightly, as if testing the drop between the concrete and the steel rails below. "Hey," Daniel called out, surprised by his own voice. "You okay?" Silence. The woman stood frozen for a moment before turning her head just enough for him to glimpse her face. It was pale, too pale under the dim light. Her lips curled into something that resembled a smile, but it was wrong, stretched too wide, too forced. Daniel's pulse quickened. He knew that kind of expression. He had seen it in the vacant stares of the city's most unhinged souls. People who wandered the streets talking to invisible figures, people who sat alone on benches, grinning at nothing. His train's arrival was announced by a low, guttural roar from the tunnel ahead. The tracks shuddered as the oncoming rush of wind sent a chill through the air. The woman laughed again, this time louder, sharper. Then, as the train's headlights burst into view, she took a step forward. Daniel lurched forward instinctively, reaching out before he could think. The woman tilted her head back, her laughter turning almost joyous, and then, a pair of hands shot out from the darkness behind her. The force was sudden, brutal. She was shoved forward, her body disappearing beneath the train's steel wheels with a sickening crunch. The platform filled with the deafening shriek of brakes and the gasps of horrified onlookers. But Daniel wasn't looking at the tracks. He was staring at the place where the pusher had stood just moments before. Empty. No one was there. A frigid shiver clawed up his spine as he slowly turned his gaze back to the tracks. The woman's body. It wasn't there either. The train groaned to a stop, its doors sliding open. The stunned passengers inside hesitated, eyes darting around in confusion. There was no sign of an accident, no body, no blood, just the distant echo of a fading laugh, swallowed by the tunnel's darkness. Daniel staggered backward, his mind racing. Had he imagined it? Had anyone else seen what he just witnessed? The doors of the train beeped their final warning before closing. Daniel hesitated for only a second before stepping inside, his hands shaking. He needed to leave. He needed to pretend this hadn't happened. As the train pulled away, he caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the window beside him. Behind his own pale face, a shadow moved. And then, just before the tunnel swallowed them whole, he heard it one last time. A soft, breathless laugh, right behind his ear. The train rumbled through the underground, its fluorescent lights flickering in and out, casting eerie shadows that danced across the metal walls. Daniel sat stiffly in his seat, his breath shallow, hands clenched into fists on his lap. His reflection in the window wavered with the motion of the train, But he wasn't looking at himself. He was looking at the space just behind him. The space where something had moved. His heart hammered against his ribs, but when he turned around, the seats behind him were empty. Just rows of cracked vinyl, stained with years of grime, bathed in the sickly glow of the overhead lights. Had he imagined it? The laugh. The shadow. The woman being pushed? Daniel ran a trembling hand over his face. He needed to get home. Maybe he was just overtired, hallucinating from exhaustion. But then, the train screeched to a sudden halt, nearly throwing him forward. The doors hissed open, revealing a dimly lit station, one he didn't recognize. The name on the tiled wall was smeared with dirt and age, the letters faded, unreadable. No one else got off. No one got on. Daniel's stomach twisted. He glanced around the car, but the only other passengers were either asleep or buried in their own worlds. Headphones in, heads down. Another laugh. Closer this time. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It hadn't come from behind him. It had come from the window. Slowly, hesitantly, he turned back to the glass. A reflection stared at him. But it wasn't his own. The woman was there, grinning, her dark hair hanging in tangled strands around her face. Her eyes, hollow and black, bore into his. She was sitting directly across from him, though when he looked away from the window, the seat was empty. His pulse pounded. He forced himself to look back at the reflection. The woman's lips parted, her grin widening unnaturally. Then she spoke. But her lips didn't move. "You saw, didn't you?" Daniel's body went rigid. The voice wasn't coming from the reflection. It was coming from directly behind him. He didn't want to turn. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to stay still, to pretend he hadn't heard, to let the train carry him far, far away from this nightmare. But something cold brushed the back of his neck, a breath, a presence. Slowly, he turned. Nothing. The seat was empty. The car was silent, save for the hum of the train against the tracks. Daniel shot up from his seat, his breathing ragged. He needed to get off this train. Now. The next stop. Anywhere. The lights flickered violently as the train lurched forward again. The world outside the window blurred into blackness, and for the first time, Daniel realized, he hadn't seen another station pass. Something was wrong. He stumbled toward the doors, gripping the pole for balance as the train rattled forward. The other passengers remained indifferent, as if locked in their own worlds, completely unaware of the terror that had seized him. Daniel's reflection in the door window caught his eye. His own face stared back at him, wild-eyed and pale. But just behind him, over his shoulder, she was there. Too close. Her face inches from his, grinning wide. Her mouth opened, but instead of words, a distorted, gurgling laugh spilled out. The lights died. The train plunged into darkness, and Daniel felt the ice-cold grip of fingers closing around his wrist. Then, the train screeched to a stop. The doors hissed open. Light flooded back into the car, and suddenly, everything was normal again. The passengers were still in their seats. The rhythmic hum of the train sounded steady, uninterrupted. Daniel staggered backward, his chest heaving. He looked wildly around. No woman. No shadow. Nothing. He was at a station. And this time, there was a name on the wall. Eldermere. He didn't recognize it. But the moment the name registered in his mind, a deep sense of unease settled over him. Daniel didn't care. He needed to get off. Now. He stumbled through the doors onto the platform, the stale underground air thick in his lungs. The train sat behind him, silent, waiting. Then, as the doors began to slide shut, he saw it. The woman. Sitting in his seat. She turned her head, her grin widening, and raised a single hand. She waved. The doors slammed shut. The train roared to life, pulling away from the station. Daniel stood frozen, his pulse hammering in his skull. He watched the train disappear into the darkness of the tunnel, his breath coming in short gasps. He wasn't safe. He could feel it. And when he turned to look at the station behind him, his stomach dropped. The platform was empty. The station silent. The lights above buzzed, flickering faintly. There was no exit in sight, no stairwell leading up, no other passengers waiting for the next train. And on the tiled wall beside him, beneath the station's name, a message had been scratched into the grime. A single sentence that made his blood run cold. She laughs before the push. The silence was suffocating. Daniel stood frozen on the empty platform, his breath shallow. The subway air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and something stale, something rotten. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, flickering in an inconsistent rhythm, as though the station itself was breathing. He turned slowly, scanning the tiled walls. Eldermere. The station name stood like an accusation, its grime-caked letters seeming to shift under his gaze. Below them, the message remained scratched into the surface. She laughs before the push. Daniel licked his dry lips, his pulse pounding in his ears. There was no exit. No stairs, no escalator, not even a set of rusted maintenance doors. Just cold, tiled walls enclosing the platform on all sides. His throat tightened. This wasn't possible. Every station had an exit. Every station led somewhere. He took a cautious step forward, his sneakers scuffing against the platform's surface. Something moved behind him. A whisper of air. A shift in the silence. Daniel spun around, his breath catching in his throat. The platform was still empty. The tracks, long abandoned, disappeared into a yawning tunnel of endless black. There was nothing. Nothing except laughter. It started softly, like a voice carried from far away, bouncing off the tiled walls. It was distant, yet uncomfortably close, low, guttural, and wrong. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. Who's there? His voice was hoarse, barely louder than a whisper. The laughter stopped. Silence again. He could feel it pressing down on him, a presence in itself, thick and cloying. Then, a tap, tap, tap. Slow and deliberate. Daniel's gaze darted to the tiled wall. His stomach twisted into knots. The words scratched into the surface. She laughs before the push. Were different now. Another line had been added beneath it. She watches now.